Welcome and thank you to the faculty at Global GHK for giving me the opportunity to share my testimonial and celebrate the World Germanic Healing Knowledge Celebration. My hope is that it helps others discover the depth and power of Germanic healing knowledge as we all continue learning through this work. My approach is shaped by life rooted in nature, from biodynamic farming to raising my children in a deeply connected way, alongside my own 25-year healing journey. This has given me a deep respect for the body's wisdom, the emotional patterns behind symptoms, and the importance of living in harmony with nature, with family, and the self. Through Germanic healing knowledge and biogeometry, I work to guide others in understanding the connection between symptoms, emotions, energy, and life experiences, supporting a return to trust in the body in a more grounded way of living. I will talk about some of the conflicts and constellations, yet at the same time, I had an incredibly rich and beautiful life. Growing up in Africa, traveling, backpacking, living on farms, gave me this deeply expansive and adventurous experience. There is so much beauty and connection. Occasionally, I had the symptoms, which were often in the background, only becoming really noticeable later on in life. But living on farms close to nature made me feel safe. When I was away, that's usually when I would shift back into the hypervigilance. And so this is a story about my quiet search to understand what was happening and to protect my children from experiencing the same things. The information presented here is intended for educational purposes only. My journey into health and nutrition has really been a healing journey of nearly 25 years. What I've come to understand is that many of the patterns and challenges that we experience later in life often begin in the first 5 years, even just before and during the mother's pregnancy. In the very beginning of life, my mom experienced a lot of traumatic experiences while she was pregnant with me. My dad was a boxer and a drinker, which made him very physical and emotionally aggressive. And he was constantly throwing parties. So my mom didn't have the safety and the support that she needed. And then my mom had to go out and work and leave me with my grandmother, which meant a separation from my own mother. One night, too, when my brother was just born, my dad had finally started working. He was working night shift. My mom was alone at home with us. And of course, at the time, there's no telephones. And 7 burglars came. That the man that was working with my mom, he lived in the house at the back, and he went to call my grandmother, who chased them away. But there's no doubt that this episode was responsible for one of the scare-fight conflicts that affected my larynx. The earliest memories that I have are also the death of my grandfather, and just having the experience of a death fright, we can experience this on behalf of another person. Soon after that, we left the town, leaving behind my other grandparents and life that we were familiar with, stepping into something completely new, far away from everyone. And this triggered a separation and abandonment, or even a refugee conflict. On top of that, like I say, there was a lot happening at home. My dad was still drinking, my parents were fighting, and things didn't always feel stable. There was also the war at the time. My dad was sent away often, so mom had to stay at home and take care of everything, which didn't always feel safe. Knowing Germanic healing knowledge, I was essentially running multiple biological programs at once, always adapting, never really feeling safe and settled. And so being in a continuous conflict active phase where the body is in survival mode. I also experienced a lot of other symptoms over time, a lot of cavities, which I now recognize as a bite conflict, wanting to bite someone of a higher authority but not being able to because you feel less than. and then later jawbone issues connected to self-evaluation. And yes, so I had also a lot of anxiety, especially in the car when my dad would drive drunk, which created a very deep fear response of the sirens, the police authority, and that gave me this feeling of powerlessness. As I got older, symptoms would come and go. There were periods of severe chronic fatigue where I could barely get out of bed and my bones and joints ached. This is a severe, anything to do with the bones, the skeleton, the muscles, the joints is connected to a self-evaluation conflict. And so I especially had them in my shoulders. The right shoulder, if you're right-handed, is usually connected to the father, your partner, or your sibling, or anyone else when there's arguments or fights between you and that person. The left side would be your mother or your child. And then I also had severe pain in my feet, and sometimes my husband would carry me. I would have such bad feet pain. This usually self-evaluation about where you are feeling stuck in some place, wanting to leave. And so I also had very bad backache, not feeling supported. Many of my symptoms were given many labels. I had chronic fatigue, Epstein-Barr. I was told I had Lyme's because growing up in Africa, I had many ticks on me, mercury toxicity from all the fillings in my cavities, bipolar. But from a GHK perspective, these are many layers of self-evaluation and unresolved conflicts and constellations. Looking back, it makes sense why I had these symptoms and why they would come and go. And I could trace them depending what was happening during those times in my life. I experienced memory loss, which was frightening. I thought I was heading to dementia or Alzheimer's. And lots of dry skin, hair loss, premature graying, and again, tying back to those separation-related conflicts. I also had a lot of severe cluster migraines, which I now see as part of the healing process, where repair is happening, not just in the body, but also in the brain. Whenever healing takes place, it takes place in a fluid environment. So the edema in the brain, it pushes against the area of the conflict. And so during the healing, that's why we have the pain in the head. So with every conflict, there is that bullseye ring that forms. It's like a tiny tumor or a tiny growth surrounded by the edema. Many of our conflicts begin very early in life, as I say, and often before we even have that conscious memory of them. If we understand the timeline, if we know the conflict, we can go back in time, we are able to trace the symptoms back to those early experiences. And this is the most important part of this work, is to know where that original track begins so we can downgrade it and even stop it. Leaving my family in the beginning, our grandparents, starting over again, this is a pattern that has continued throughout my life, through my parents, life with my parents, and my own life with my own kids. And so this is experienced as a very strong separation conflict. With the separation conflict, Dr. Hammer describes this as a kind of a biological state of emergency. If you think of an animal that's left alone in nature, it becomes extremely vulnerable. It could be attacked or not survive. And so the body responds in very specific ways. On the skin, we don't realize this, but there are these tiny micro ulcerations in the tissue that occur. So we become numb. So we have less feelings about the person that we've lost or we've been separated with. Separation conflicts are regarding who we've been separated from and who we want to separate from. So sometimes you want to separate from someone, you will have very similar symptoms. We don't notice when these micro ulcerations happens, but when we reconnect with that person and we find that safety again, that's usually when the rash appears or the itching or even the hair loss. What is important is that we also, when we lose the contact, we don't just have that numbing of the skin, but we also disconnect with our memory. We lose memory. If you can notice, if you have this short-term memory loss where you forget things, and this is seen so often with elderly who have dementia. This is a separation conflict. Looking back for me, I experienced the dry skin, the thinning hair, the weak nails, the challenges with my memory. Learning at school, I found it very hard to retain information, and I found it very difficult to express myself. It wasn't the lack of ability, it was the state of disconnection my body was putting me in this survival program to help me. We often underestimate how deeply moving, changing locations, leaving a familiar family, how this affects children, and especially when they're separated at birth in the ICU, they put in ICU, or they are put in daycare facilities when they're away from their mom, or they separated in their own room before they are ready. And so this is very scary for a child. Children have no concept of time. They don't know when their mother's coming back, if she's ever going to come back. And so they really experience this in a traumatic way. Being taken away from your home, your grandparents, everything familiar. And so this was a very hard experience for us as children. And we didn't realize at the time. But this shows up later on in life with KCT and separation conflicts. How we behave and react later on in life is this is how it shows up. Just as we were settling into our new home in Zimbabwe, my dad said when I was 10, okay, we have to leave again. We're not staying in Zimbabwe, we're moving to South Africa. And that brought another wave of uncertainty and fear. So when you understand this, you begin to see why children have memory issues, why they struggle with learning, and even the physical symptoms. I want to talk about the kidney collecting tubules because for a child, a move or a separation can also feel like an abandonment. It's not just a change of place. It's experienced biologically as a loss of safety, of connection, of having a place where you belong. This is what we describe as an abandonment or a refugee conflict, or somewhere where you feel like your existence is threatened. And I fully resonate with the kidney collecting tubules because that was how I felt being uprooted, not having that solid foundation or feeling safe in my environment, not having community or friends, feeling like a fish out of water. And this program biologically is so deeply protective. The body shifts into that survival state, holding on to water as a way to preserve life. It's very primitive. It's almost like your body is saying, I need to hold on to everything, to conserve everything for you to stay alive. And so the system will retain the fluids, it's going to reduce elimination, and the body is going to begin to feel heavy and swollen. And so there's that sense of feeling stuck, both physically and emotionally, in this survival mode. And we see this pattern so often with the young children placed in the daycare. We talked about the separation, but abandonment too, when they're separated from their primary bond and they begin to hold on to more water. Or the elderly moved into the care homes and they show up with more swelling. And even the homeless people, I see them here so often in Miami, and their legs are swollen. They have lost their stability, their sense of place. And it all presents as it's the same pattern, different situations, but the biological experience is if something happens to me, who is there for me? And so this pattern showed up clearly throughout my life. And when I had my children, we left Miami, we moved to the Dominican Republic. And actually, that transition brought me a deeper sense of safety because my husband was working all day and I was left alone at home with my child. And when I went there, we created this community. My parents were there. I had people to help me. We worked on the farm. And so it was such a big relief, even though we moved to a different place. I did experience some confusion, forgetfulness, kind of disorientation, but it wasn't very long because I felt good there. Another time, after 7 years, fell pregnant with the twins. And so and I also needed to get my American passport. So we had to come back to live in the United States. And so once again, we left this beautiful place of support. This was the best I'd ever felt in my life was those 7 years. We moved to California and we lived there for 8 years. And over time, we built a beautiful life, community, farm. We had the farm there. We had a little school for the children and amazing friendships. And then again, we had to let that go because the farm was difficult to maintain. The boys were ready for something different, the older boys who are now 24 and 19. And so we've moved back to Miami. And I find myself starting over, leaving the community and the friends that felt familiar. When I arrived here, I gained a lot of water weight and I couldn't understand why. And then I had that feeling of confusion, resistance to go out. I would go from my home to the beach and back, not even interested in going out to meet people. So now I've changed that. I've pushed myself to go out to meet people, and I'm slowly finding community. So there is also that sense of disorientation, confusion with time and space. Sometimes I would mix up days, not knowing what the date is, and going somewhere a day earlier or a day later, or even going to the machine and forgetting the PIN for my credit card. And so that's how KCT would show up for me. And so alongside that, yeah, it was just the feeling of not feeling that safety or feeling fully supported, having friends and community here. And also my digestion had slowed down. Um, I've had the constipation since I was a little girl. And when you don't feel safe, you just don't let go. Your body holds on physically, emotionally, and the digestion is going to slow down, elimination slows. But even when you're conflict active, your body it's not going to allow you to go to the toilet because you have a tiger chasing you and there's no time for that. And so I I feel like I've always been in this constant survival state, running from that threat. And I know that the body prioritizes survival above all else. So, what is important to know is that the body is not working against us, it's working for us. Growing up, I experienced something that took me a long time to understand, a deep pattern of fear in my body. There were many moments where I felt completely frozen, where my family, my mom and I, my brother, we witnessed a lot of frightening things, oftentimes connected to my dad's drinking. He was a boxer, so he had violent street fights. He had a very bad accident, and oftentimes we would drive a few hours out from where we lived in the city and um, late at night, and we would get lost in unsafe neighborhoods while he was drunk, and it was very, very scary. So, as a young child, it's easy for a child to go into a state of shock or fear, unable to call out or react, completely speechless. And there were very early imprints too, as a baby, where I poured boiling water, a kettle, over my chest and had to go to hospital every day for bandaging. And I remember my dad too holding my hand over a red hot coal stove to threaten to burn it because my brother and I stole some little crackers when we were little. And at the same time, the fear was reinforced constantly. There was news in the background on the TV, stories of violence, being attacked, raped, murders. And I used to lie awake at night thinking that someone was going to come into my room. And I would have these reoccurring dreams that a crow was there to attack me, and I would try to scream and no sound would come. And even in nature, we lived around crocodiles and hippos, and we had sharks. And so there was always that constant awareness of something that could be coming out of the water. My dog got eaten by a crocodile. And so even today, when I swim in the ocean and I see shadows, I have to constantly remind myself that I'm safe. I'm not that little girl. I don't need to be afraid. And so in the moment of these shocks, these scare fight conflicts, the body freezes and the voice disappears. This is linked to the larynx. At a biological level, it's in that moment of shock, the body adapts by slightly opening the airway. It's like it's widening the tubes so it can prepare to take in more air so that I can breathe through this dangerous situation. And we don't notice this. It's very quiet. It happens internally when the nervous system is on high alert, when we're in conflict active phase. And then when the danger is over, the body shifts into healing. And this is when we usually see the symptoms like the hoarseness in the voice, losing your voice, irritation in the throat, the coughing. And for children, it can show up as the croup, the sudden barking cough, the difficulty breathing, or even the laryngitis. And so there's another layer involving the muscles of the larynx, because during the conflict, the voice can feel weak or breathy, almost like it disappears. And during that healing, there's this tightening or spasm, which you feel like you suddenly can't even inhale properly. You don't have enough breath. And it's described as the laryngeal asthma, which I had often, and I have a little bit now. So even now, I feel that this pattern still lives in my body. When I feel threatened, even emotionally, my breathing does change. And recently I felt attacked by a friend, and so I had this same response. And then I just have to constantly remind myself that I'm safe. Alongside this, there was another layer of difficulty expressing myself, and this shows up in the broca area of the brain. And I would often know exactly what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get the words out. And so I often stayed quiet. I would just sit in the background. I felt afraid that I might say the wrong thing at the time. It's confusing and very frustrating. And so through GHK, this relates to what is called the speechlessness conflict, connected to the Broca's area of the brain. And the relay in this brain that controls the muscles of the speech, which is connected to the tongue, the lips, the jaw, and the vocal cords. And for me, those repeated moments of fear and helplessness created that imprint. And the body, it doesn't just experience the shock, it's recorded through the psyche, it's imprinted on the brain, and it shows up in these organ relays. And so the same pattern can be re-triggered over and over again. There's another constellation, the megalomania constellation, and this can express itself as a strong need for control over others. A person who feels compelled to manage situations, to influence others, to control them, to maintain a position of power over them. This compulsion to exercise control. And it also evokes low self-esteem in another person in order to maintain the need of being in this superior position, because they themselves have a severe self-devaluation conflict. And so these attempts to establish this sense of confusion in the other person regarding the view of themselves, their interpretation of life, their perception of reality, their memory and their intellectual or social skills. And when this is combined with an aggressive pattern, it can be hurtful. And manipulation is used in a way that creates this emotional and psychological harm. My mom and I grew up around these dynamics within her family. And because of that, my mom, she also has this problem with her speech, her broca area of the brain. And she often encouraged me to stay quiet, don't say certain things, don't tell the family this or that, because she was always trying to keep the peace. She was the peacekeeper, and she did this to try to avoid conflicts and protect the family from tension. And for a child, this creates a very strong imprint where you begin to feel that speaking up is unsafe, that your words might create problems, and that it's better to just hold back than to fully express yourself. And it's not just that one moment of fright, it all becomes this repeated experience, this learned pattern. And the body begins to associate speaking with danger, with consequence, with loss of safety. And I began to see this clearly, especially learning GHK. And when I was joining webinars and group settings, I would feel afraid to speak. And sometimes when I had to, I would start shaking and my mind would go blank, and I just lost the information. It was there, but then it would just disappear. And so I notice it now too with especially strong, dominant personalities, people that have this megalomania, gaslighting constellation. They intimidate me. And so there's still that hesitation, that old fear of how I will be received, and it's all a work in progress. Instead of avoiding it, I've been working through it. I've been standing up for myself. I've been doing these presentations, and speaking is becoming less uncomfortable and part of the resolution. Before I would go into a state of panic. And I remember one day even standing in front of class and forgetting my words and the class laughing at me. So the more I do this, the more I can resolve this pattern. And I'm learning to stay calmer, reminding myself that I'm safe and that nobody can harm me. And it hasn't just been about understanding the conflict. It's about gently retraining my system step by step every day, reminding myself it's work, but it has to be done. And I also developed a deep sense of compassion for my dad, who passed away from lymphoma and heart attack. He had a deep self-devaluation, bioaggressive constellation, megalomania, and I see that he too was moving through his own conflicts and constellations, things that I didn't understand at the time. And he wasn't acting randomly. His system was responding to conflicts that he was dealing with, and it was the only way he knew how. His super senses were helping him. And at the same time, this understanding has also changed how I see relationships. And when we have more awareness, especially as women, in how we communicate towards men, how we respond to them, this energy we bring forth. If my mother and I had spoken to my dad in a different way, it probably could have softened the dynamics and prevented certain patterns from escalating. But more than anything, it's been a journey about forgiveness, not excusing what happened, but seeing it differently, letting go of the fear, the tension, the weight that I carried for so long. And it's brought a lot more peace for myself, my mother, and the forgiveness for my dad. I also want to talk about the pattern of hypervigilance, which I'll touch on briefly because I've already prepared a presentation on global GHK about the frontal fear, the occipital, and the paranoia constellation. But this is also layered in there. And so you can find that too at biologicalharmony.com. we chose to live on organic farms because I wanted to have that perfect life for my kids, free of toxins, free of chemicals, surrounding ourselves in nature. I truly felt like I was doing everything possible to support good health and live in a sanctuary. And we were living the most beautiful natural lifestyle. However, there was still that fear that was lingering in the background, and I still had symptoms of brain fog, memory loss, fatigue, sore muscles and bones, and it didn't make sense. I also wasn't sleeping. I was constantly conflict active. And up until 5 years ago, I had tried every diet, vegetarian, I was gluten free, I was on GAPS for 4 years. I did every detox, every organ parasite cleanse. I did enemas for years, every protocol, and I read every book. And so during my naturopathy studies with energetic wellness, this was my first introduction to Germanic healing knowledge, and I'm forever grateful to them and Andy Lockmears, because something deep began to reveal itself to me. I realized that I wasn't living in peace. I was living in this hypervigilance. I was constantly scanning the dangers for the foods, the toxins, the EMFs, the environmental exposures. And I was always blaming something outside there for my symptoms. And especially when I would leave the farm and visit friends or go places where I didn't feel that I was in my sanctuary, so I would feel that tension arise. And this is where too the frontal fear and the paranoia comes in. So there was that inner state that became that background stress. And looking back, I can see the pattern clearly. It wasn't the chemicals. It If it wasn't the chemicals, it was always something else. And if it wasn't the food, it was the scents, it was the pool chemicals, then the EMFs. I think my husband must have thought I was crazy. He's still with me. So there are always something new. There was always something new to eliminate, something to protect against. And one of the clearest turning points for me was when I listened to the EMF summit. They said that because I had memory loss, and they said that EMFs were the cause of memory loss and will contribute to Alzheimer's. And that information caught me off guard. It landed in the way that made me feel overwhelmed. I was completely isolated in the moment. That fear set in, and every time I saw a phone, I became dumbstruck. I couldn't find my words. I felt sick. I would get headaches. Every time I saw a cell phone tower, my mind would go blank. And so I truly believed that I was being harmed just from hearing that. The mind is so powerful. The body, how it reacts to fear. And so it wasn't the EMF itself. And there's no doubt EMFs, toxins, there is a danger to it. And my home is harmonized. I eat organic foods. But now I live in Miami with 5G, and I'm not harmed. I don't feel sick. I actually feel the best I've ever felt in my life. And so it was really the shock that created that. So my system just labeled everything as being dangerous, put me into this hypervigilance state. The moment I realized that this was just some type of paranoia constellation, which was also affecting my eyes, and the frontal fear, where it was affecting my thyroid ducts and my pharyngeals. The moment I started to just not see everything as a danger, and just to tell myself I'm really safe, that this is my own paranoia, and reframe everything, my body stopped being in that hypervigilant state. I can sleep at night. I don't have the fears. I can go out anywhere and I can be around phones, cell phone towers. I can eat non-organic foods and I'm fine, and I eat all the bread that I want. Whereas before, like I say, I was not eating grains for many years. For me, the most important thing through all of this has been keeping my family together. The sense of unity, of being there for each other, is what creates the strength and stability. I am so deeply grateful for my husband, who has always been there to protect and provide, even through my crazy paranoia moments. He's done everything for me to make me feel safe. And we are here now in Miami for my older children. And although I can see that the younger ones would have thrived differently if we'd stayed on the farm, but this is how life has unfolded, and I've come to accept it. And what matters now is how we live within it. And even in the modern city, I want to continue living in biological harmony, creating safety within our home, staying connected as a family, building the sense of grounding and support from the inside out. With my younger children, this has been something I've consciously protected. They're not forced into rigid structures. There's no pressure. There's no strict control or demanding school or sports schedules. They have space. They have freedom to explore, to follow their interests, and to learn through their own experiences. They've actually chosen to go to school next year, and for me, that feels very different. It's coming from them, not from pressure. And if they enjoy it, they can continue. If they don't, they always have the option to learn from home. Because ultimately, I trust that learning happens naturally when a child feels safe, supported, and free to be themselves. And in the same way, I'm continuing the process within myself. It has taken time to resolve these patterns, and I'm still on the journey. Certain triggers, symptoms can still show up, but the difference now is that I no longer have the same fear. I have a deeper understanding of what may be behind them, even if some of them are still unfolding. And that understanding changes everything. It brings the sense of calm, the trust, the ability to work with the body rather than feeling like I'm fighting against it. When symptoms do arise, I gently step back. I remind myself that I'm not that little girl anymore. I'm safe. There's nothing to be afraid of. Nobody's going to harm me, and I'm not going to die. And with that awareness, I slowly return to that trust, that peace, that ease. And so I always know that the biology is working for me. And in many simple ways, through mantras, through reassurance, my body learns to relax. And I'm working on switching off using the subconscious. Danny Carroll has an amazing course on that brings back that sense of safety into the system. I use many supportive tools that help and guide the process. There's transformation.com. I do yoga, meditation. I do Zumba and even belly dance to get back into my feminine and find that feminine group and support. Biogeometry, I use cell salts, homeopathy, flower essences, and sound healing. Most of all, it's the time in nature. It's cleansing in the ocean, and just living more in alignment with our biology helps to reinforce the message of safety. Over time, the body just learns to relax and to trust, and we will find our own natural rhythm. Thank you.